One. Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Madere. I'm here with several members of the Catholic Psychotherapy Association. We've, just as a group and individually, been receiving a number of requests from parishes, individuals, agencies in our local areas just about how to live and cope and minister in the time of COVID. So we have a few tips to share with you today. I hope that you'll find something of what we have to offer useful in your own practice or ministry or life. So just a little bit about the Catholic Psychotherapy Association, if you're not familiar. Our mission is to support mental health practitioners by promoting the development of psychological theory and mental health practice, encompassing the full understanding of the human person and family, society, etc., in fidelity to the magisterium of the Catholic Church. And so we like to share what we have today within that spirit. And just to note that while we are all members of the CPA, we don't necessarily represent the views or recommendations of the CPA as an organization, and urge you just to take what we have to share today and filter it through your own role and responsibility as it pertains to your practice or your ministry, your license, whatever that happens to look like. And so first today we have Joan Huss from Nebraska. She serves at Catholic Charities there, who's going to say a little bit about priests and parents and principals, and especially how we're all in this together. Go ahead, Joan, whenever you're ready.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Joan Huss, and I'm, as Jennifer said, I'm with Catholic Charities Omaha, and my role there is the director of the behavioral health program. And we have two programs at Catholic Charities Omaha. We have our school-based mental health program, which has about 5 therapists who serve Catholic schools throughout the Archdiocese. And then we also have a traditional outpatient program that serves families and individuals. And so most of the information I'm hearing is from the folks that we serve. And parents have concerns, priests have concerns, and principals have concerns. As you can see, most of them are anxiety-based and anxiety-related, and how their anxiety affects them. Parents want to know, how can I help my kids with life transitions? Priests are telling me that they're struggling with anger and resentments over the choices they have to make due to the COVID pandemic. And principals, big on their list is, how do I help teachers return to school? And so for the priests, I think when we talk about anger and resentments overall, priests are worried about their congregation, but they're also missing their own social interactions. And so the questions are, can I continue to meet my own mental health needs and social needs? And I think it's important to be aware of what those needs are and realize that you can make decisions based on your knowns. Take care of yourself and get support. You don't have to feel isolated during this time, and make sure that you do carve out time for family and friends, and do so in terms of risk benefit and risk analysis. I think when we think of COVID in terms of I have to stop or I can prevent, you can't prevent, but there are known ways we can reduce risks. And for our parents, I think it's important when they're wondering, how do I help my kids manage through this life transition? It's important to know what your children's individual differences are. I have students that I work with who are not worried about the pomp and circumstances of graduation. What they're worried about is how I'm going to say goodbye to my friends. But I have other kids who miss the celebration parts of that. So it's important to talk to your kids and figure out what they're missing and what they're needing, and then respond accordingly, because you can set up virtual play dates and you can set up virtual things that kids can do to still feel connected. And for principals, what we're hearing loudly is staff is very worried. Teachers are worried about going back in the classroom. And I think for them, it's important to realize that we are not powerless. We do know about this virus. We know what we can do to reduce risk. We know social distancing can be effective. We know wearing masks can be effective. It's important to realize what is within our circle of control and what we can do to help ourselves, and what is not within our control. And that gives a sense of power. I think it's also very important to encourage people who are really struggling and it's affecting daily life to get professional help if needed. It's okay to reach out and get support during this time, and there are folks who can help walk with individuals who are experiencing anxiety at high rates that affect their ability to function on a daily basis.
Hey, Joan, that really gives us a sense for the kinds of things people are struggling with, especially in your community. And I'm sure that generalizes to other communities as well. So next, we have Mary Briggs. She's a counselor from Wisconsin and is going to say a little bit about PTSD, especially when anger occurs. Mary?
Hello, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I work primarily with adults who have suffered some kind of trauma in childhood, and I bring a Catholic faith perspective to that, allowing God to bring his healing while they learn new ways of behaving. At first, when I put this criteria together, I thought, oh, this is a little bit too technical. But so what I'm going to do, however, is condense it so you realize that anger and irritability and over-the-top expressions are actually a significant criteria to understand is PTSD happening. So there's 8 criteria for PTSD. I didn't put them all up here. You can go to the citation I have at the bottom of the page if you're interested. But the core of it, 2 of them, are about negative alterations in cognitions, which is thinking, and mood, which is anger, irritability, anxiety, and alterations in arousal, which is getting ramped up and then reacting rather than thinking. So we can go to the next slide. So how is that part of responding to trauma, and why do we need to know it? If you folks generally deal with grief, that's something you're familiar with. You understand when people get upset at the loss, they feel robbed. Well, what I'd like you to understand that trauma is a significantly rooted in grief. And anger can be a significant part of the reactivity we feel. We feel powerless. And when I think about how anger and biting remarks and complaining about politicians in the church and even the priest and, you know, the people at the door at Walmart that are handing out masks, all of that is a projection. It's like a shield that comes in front of people, and then they wield their sword in order to be sure that their vulnerable feelings behind that shield are protected and never expressed because they're so overwhelming. That's the grief of trauma. So when that happens, when we see someone who is angry, they may be expressing underlying feelings of loss. And it can be a truly healing step to resolve the grief of trauma, to recognize it, to realize it's not personal. It's not necessarily directed at you, even though they may be right in your face. Somehow, if there's an opportunity to unlock that hidden grief, you might acknowledge their anger. You might say, I hear it. I made a mistake, or so-and-so has overstepped their bounds. Yes, you're right. You've got your anger and your justice to it. You begin to connect with them. They want to be heard. But then, if the opportunity is right, saying, well, if you could look underneath your anger, what might you be feeling? And it's an amazing thing how often people can get there really quickly. They'll say, well, I feel vulnerable or sad. And if you ask, well, have you felt these feelings before this time, before this current COVID crisis? They might say, oh, yeah, I remember when my dad died when I was 17, and I felt angry and wanted to just hit everybody and everything and just tune out. And then that can become the place for empathy. So connection, reflection of their feelings, empathy of, gosh, that must have been a terribly powerless time, a lot like now, and compassion to help heal that isolation that they felt. It reduces anger. It connects to them in their deep grief, and it opens doors for them to ask God for healing, because as Catholic ministers and lay ministers and priests and principals, we can offer God to them, and that's a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Really appreciate perspective and compassion there. Yeah. So I'm Jennifer Madere. I'm going to say just a little bit about, what is trauma anyway. My specialty is working with adults and minors, individuals who have experienced trauma. I'd like to say just a little bit about how we might perceive trauma and how individual that can be. As Mary mentioned, there are criteria for PTSD, and we refer to trauma maybe vernacularly, but we may or may not know what that means. So I want to just offer a definition that might be useful, especially in this time, which would be that trauma could be defined as an experience for which someone lacks the present capacity to understand, process, and otherwise cope with it. So it surpasses just their ability developmentally or bandwidth wise in their life to be able to understand and process and cope. And so based on that, individuals can have very different responses to present circumstances and very different capacities related to the same event or time frame or interaction. So they might perceive and process and take in those experiences differently based on their past and based on current stressors. Some of us are carrying a heavy load. Some of us might be able to process things better in the present moment. And so what can we do with this? We can best process and have our greatest capacity to receive and process the experience in our lives when we're supporting one another and ourselves and staying regulated, meaning physiologically, emotionally, and maybe even spiritually regulated, calm, connected, and relating to each other. So often we need to regulate, we need to calm before we can relate and can allow our God-given capacity to function at its best, and to be able to, make rational thoughts and decisions and take in information in a rational way. So just offer that, to regulate and relate, and then perhaps reason, and we can process a lot better, especially amid less than ideal circumstances, which of course we're experiencing a lot of lately. So with that, I will hand it off to Maribel Laguna. Maribel?
Hi, I'm Maribel Laguna. I am the co-owner of Indian's Image Counseling Center, and we receive various requests from our diocese addressing the fear amidst COVID-19. And one of the things that I like to do when I speak to Catholic audiences is frame the trauma piece as collective trauma. We're all in this together, like Joan said, and we're all experiencing a traumatic event together. And so some people call it social trauma, other people call it collective trauma. Examples of this might be 9/11. I think we can all attest to that, all of us that were at least millennials or a little bit before that, we remember the exact time, day, details of where we were during 9/11. And how did we react to that? What was it that we struggled with? How did we make sense of that? And so we have the opportunity from drawing from past experiences in order to cope with the current situation. And what I tell Catholics is that we have been training for COVID-19 our entire Catholic lives, because we experience collective trauma during Lent, during the Triduum. And so when we reflect on the crucifixion and we witness the death of someone that we dearly care about together, then we have the resources to cope with something like COVID-19, which is also a collective trauma. And so let's draw on the richness of our faith and what helps us cope during Lent, what helps us cope during the crucifixion of our Lord, to make sense of our current situation. And so what I encourage people to do is to draft a plan and spin it however you want, whether it's your self-care plan, whether it's your compassion fatigue prevention plan, your affective protection plan, because we want to protect our affective emotions of love and desire. And when those are compromised, that means that we're probably putting too much emphasis on the fear, which holds us back from living out of, where we're naturally supposed to live out of. And so, however you spin it, here are my suggestions as to elements that need to be in your self-care plan. They need to address every part of the human person. And so I drew a little bit on the pillars of foundation, and then I added my own pillars. So this is just like a sample of something that I do and I encourage clients to do, is really have something that helps you resource physically. And so what is it that will empower your physical state? Intellectually, what are you doing to kind of feed your intellect, whether it's reading, whether it's listening to podcasts, whether it's talking to someone about philosophy, or just whatever empowers you in that area. How are you taking care of yourself emotionally? And again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Let's just start simple. Do some deep breathing. Maybe you take an extra break during work, because we have a lot more factors to account for. Spiritually, how are you resourcing yourself? Is it you're meditating on the gospel every day? Is it maybe reading about the saints? Communally, how are you resourcing yourself? How are you staying connected to family and friends? I think Joni mentioned some of that, and Mary was talking about how connecting to others in the midst of all of this is so important. Vocationally, are you asking yourself, what is God calling me to do right now in COVID-19? Because He has allowed for this situation to happen for a reason. And there's an opportunity here that will really feed your vocation and what you choose to make of this for the future of the church. And that's a burden of responsibility on us as Catholics, but it's also an opportunity to explore these passions that you haven't previously explored because of work, because of certain other obligations. Well, now you have the freedom to do so. And then most importantly, leisure. And this is very different from entertainment. I'm very grateful actually that lots of entertainment has been canceled, because now we have the opportunity to explore things like baking bread, or last week I started making ice cream and gardening. And it's like all these leisurely activities that are part of Catholic life that we've just abandoned and left to the wayside. And so just reconnecting to that, because that's the way of reconnecting to your passions, to your affective drive, which will naturally ease the fear of COVID-19.
Thank you, Maribel. I just want to invite just some reflection. We've offered a lot for y'all to consider today. What else might we want to just share with listeners or viewers or the lay Catholic who might be watching?
As I'm listening to all of us speak and talk, I think there's a common thread here. as of course, as therapists believe, with regard to learning that the emotions that we've given, the anger, the anxiety, the fear, those are God-given emotions. And it's with reflection and it's with rationality that God has also given us that we can manage them in ways that are effective and helpful for both of us. Maribel, I loved the self-care plans. I think those are so very, very important so that we can not react from an emotional place, but we're able to regulate our emotions and then be rational with them. So it pulls together nicely because I think the largest fear right now is anxiety of the unknown. How do I manage this? And that's the part where we're all in this together because there's no answers. There's no answers. This is the first time, not just nationally, but globally, our Earth is dealing with this. So those are the important pieces, is to be able to manage our responses in healthy ways.
For me, as I listen to Joan's presentation and Maribel's presentation, I very humbly bring that I'm not doing so good. It's hard. It's hard to be in solo practice, and it's hard when people come with their hurt and anxiety and fear, and to leave as a principal or to leave as a priest or to go to bed at night as a parent and say, what did I tell my kid? What do I do? The realization is that, well, we really are all in this together. And I really appreciated hearing Jennifer's perspective on it and realizing, well, capacity. Oh, I'm over my capacity right now. Now that's a different reflection. And I can say, okay, Lord, fill me up. What do I need to do to increase my capacity, to empty myself more, I guess? So quite frankly, I am finding this presentation exceedingly helpful. And I hope that Maribel's plan is people implement, because those sorts of structures really help when the world seems all chaotic. That's my thought.
Absolutely. One phrase that I'd have to attribute to someone I've worked with over the last couple of months is that we're living in a big question mark, right? Just that experience of living in the question mark, right? It's kind of a twisty kind of form, right? It's not a straight line letter in any font. I don't think I've ever seen a straight question mark, right?
Right.
It's not linear, it's curvy. So just that experience of living in the question mark, right?
Wow.
And living with God in the question mark.
Yes.
Right? Maybe he's the dot on the bottom of the question mark that keeps us grounded, just as I'm thinking about this, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
That experience, yeah.
And I think that's the experience of living in the question mark with God is really where the question of vocation comes, right? If you sit in that discomfort, I really think, maybe this is a little bit preemptive on my part, but I think a lot of vocations are going to come out of this time, because finally we're able to be silent and really listen to what God is calling us to do.
Wow, very true. Very, very profound thought.
Many of my clients are eating together as a family for the first time because the sports are not going on. The practices are not going on. It has really forced families to function as families. And that's the refreshing side of this, I think.
And I think that this is an answer to what I've seen in my practice, is that the domestic church is very hurt.
Yes.
And so when we always talk about the crisis in the church, let's talk about the crisis in the domestic church.
Yes.
Bringing people back, together, having intimate, intentional conversations, family activities, family fun, family leisure. That's where really we're breaking bread.
Thank you all who joined us today, Mary and Joan and Maribel. If you didn't find us at CatholicPsychotherapy.org, I invite you to go learn more about our organization or look up our member directory and let us know how we can help. God bless you, and our Mother of Good Counsel, pray for us.
Amen.